I'm staring right now. And if they got around this line, the only thing that these Pennsylvanians could have done is go directly behind me, go up Route 1, and which they did. Now let me tell you about the flanking maneuver here also. When they started to break and run to go to Birmingham over there, the British just knew exactly what to do. They said, let's get around the army. They knew that the Pennsylvanians were still on top of this ridge. They knew the guns were here. You can't charge gun positions. They'd fire that grape shot at you and kill you. And there was a lot of guys up here protecting these cannons. You got the commander up here that knows exactly what he's doing. Washington wasn't a stupid man. He knew when to stay and when to leave. But he had to send those reserves. He had to send his reserves, and he also had to send the right of his line up to Birmingham. And he knew that. So basically, the British were on the other ridge, on that tree line, all the way up to about the same length, about a half or a quarter mile up across the Brandywine. So they saw the line go. They put their cartridge boxes on top of their head. They grabbed their rifles right across the river. Now that's called a river, Brandywine Creek, river. Actually, from what I've known, it's exactly the way it would have been during colonial times. It probably, at the deepest point, will go up to your waist. At the shallowest point, it would have went up to your ankles. So they probably just jumped on in and across the creek they came. And which they did. They did come across the creek. Now the main force of the British were in the center of this line, right where these cannons are, right behind me. That was the main force. That was all the good, that was cavalry. Because at Chad's Ford, that's how they had to cross. Now we're going to talk a little bit about a ford. What is a ford? Why do they call it Britain's Ford? Why do they call it Worcester's Ford? Why do they call it Chad's Ford? Well, fords during the 17th and actually 16th century, there was no structure over the creek. A ford was a road that went into the creek, went across the creek, and then the road continued on the other side of the embankment. Now what people did with their fords is they threw rocks in there so it wouldn't be as deep. They made sure that it was flat so that the carts could go across the creek. That's what was at Chad's Ford. It wasn't a bridge. It wasn't a covered bridge. It was nothing there but just a little way to go across, which they did. So Hal couldn't get his wagon, they couldn't get their wagons across the creek. It's too deep. There's embankments. They would crash into the creek. They had to use the fords to get their ammunition across the creek to this point. Because if the British come over, they have a cartridge box. There's possibly about 30 rounds in there, maybe 2 of them. Some of them double them up. They had about 100 rounds of ammunition. Now when you're engaged in a battle where you have cannons, you're going to use up 40 rounds like that. Now across the creek, they had to take their ammunition wagons. They knew that the battle was beginning. The troops were coming across the Brandywine. They had to get their wagons. They took Chad's Ford. They pushed the Americans out of here. Anthony Wayne's Pennsylvanians here had to retreat. They started to come across this creek too, right in front of me. They came across here, they outflanked us. They came, the left of the British line saw the retreat. They came across the Brandywine at Britain's Ford. It was another ford. It was another cart path where they could get across to bring ammunition. They got across there. The British were in this area. The British were about a quarter mile from these cannons. Now you got guys outflanking you. These cannons, you got guys outflanking you to your left. And now you got the onslaught of the British right in front of you coming across Chad's Ford. These guys held their line. I really give it to them. These guys held their line up until the last point, to where right in back of me is a hill. And this was probably like this. Until those guys came over that hill, they didn't leave their field pieces. These Continental artillery lived by these field pieces. There's accounts of British on the other side. They actually used their field pieces to inflict justice on other soldiers. They would beat you on top of the cannon. These cannons were well used. They were worn. They were old. These cannons were like a son of the gun. If you ever hear that, a son of a gun, they lived by these cannons. And these Continental artillerists knew each piece of cannon. It was like their mother. They took care of them. They polished them. They took care, and they were just unbelievable. They didn't want to leave these guns, and I don't blame them either. Because running away and leaving your mother behind, nobody wants to do that. So over where that house is in the distance right there, you would just see the British onslaught, bayonets at you. You guys that are soaking wet. They're muddy, they just crossed the Brandywine, and they're a little pissed off because you've been shooting at them and they don't like you. They retreated. They left the redoubt over to my left. They left their guns behind. Now, there's a lot of accounts about the wagons. The wagons would have been behind me. They would have been about a quarter of a mile behind the army. A lot of reports now are that these wagoneers, these guys that would take the wagons, they would drive the wagons. They weren't fighters. They didn't have guns. They were just wagoneers. There's heroic accounts of Hector going around this area where we're at while the battle was going on and saving ammunition, saving weapons that were left on the ground, saving powder. And this is just stories that you hear during the battle and during the retreat, that this gentleman would risk his life to pick up weapons, the wounded, and bring them out of here while the British were advancing on this area. So the British got their